Hi everyone, and welcome to the latest CTO Craft Bytes on Friday, the 26th of June, 2020. Today, we will discuss how motivation works in the brain, how to capitalize on new understanding of neuroscience involved, and tactical ways to motivate engineering team members with Andy Skipper. If this is your first time at CTO Craft, let me tell you a little bit more about the group. CTO Craft is a mentoring and coaching community for technology leaders around the world, focusing on supporting technologists in their leadership growth. Community members are over 1,250 and provides one-on-one coaching, mentoring groups, an online community, and events like this one. So I'm emceeing this Byte session today. So I'm Glyn, the CTO of Digital Solutions at iTechArt. Our speaker today is Andy Skipper, Chief Coach and founder of CTO Craft, former CTO at Made.com and Comic Relief. Andy, could you give us a further introduction, please?
Hey, Glyn. Good to be here. Yep. So indeed, I started CTO Craft a few years ago as a group of coaches and a free mentoring resource for people stepping up into technology leadership roles. And it's now, as Glyn said, it's about 1,250 people and a newsletter and these events. And in the future, we're going to be working on some courses and some learning materials. So keep your eyes peeled for that. But happy to be here.
Great to have you, Andy. So we'll save the time at the end for the audience to ask their own questions. So please feel free to add your questions from the Ask a Question button underneath the video. So let's get started and discuss neuroscience and motivation. So what are some of the scientific models to think about motivation, Andy?
Sure, yeah. So there's obviously been a lot of research into how to get people to do things, essentially, and there are some scientific models that have come up through the ages. At the most basic level, there's Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which talks about what spurs us to do things, what spurs us to avoid things. But there are a number of more specific models, like the McClelland needs model, which talks about the need for achievement, and the need for power, and the need for affiliation. And then there's the Hertzberg hygiene theory, which makes a differentiation between things that motivate us and what he calls hygiene factors. So the motivators are things that add to your job satisfaction, and hygiene factors are things that detract from your satisfaction. And that's been pretty popular in the startup world, but there are some criticisms of that model. So some people, for example, say that it talks about job satisfaction more than it does about motivation. And there's obviously a link between those, but they're not necessarily the same things. And it also talks about the fact that people tend to take credit when things go well, for example, and blame their failure on their environment. That seems to be a natural human tendency. So it's a useful model to use, but it's not the be all and end all. There is more to it than that.
Okay, great.
Then there are more.
Yeah, sure.
there are a couple that are quite popular and quite modern. So there's the SCARF models. SCARF stands for status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. And then there's the classic Daniel Pink drive model, which is autonomy, mastery, and purpose, which I think is the simplest model that people tend to put in. But there's one more model which not many people have come across, but which is quite relevant to this discussion, which is a model that was created by a chap with a great name, Victor Vroom, VROOM, and it's Vroom's expectancy theory. And basically it says that motivation depends on an understanding of the relationship between three things: expectancy, which is understanding that an increase of effort will increase in performance, and that relies on having the right tools and the right resources available to you, the right skills. And it talks about instrumentality, which is about having an understanding of the relationship between how you perform and what the outcome is, what the reward is. And then balance, which is the value placed on the combination of the above. So it's the value based on the relationship between the outcome of what you're working on and the reward you'll get for that outcome. So that's quite a key theory to think about.
Cool. Any more models, or they're the key ones to be looking at?
Those are the key ones. We'll be talking more about Victor Vroom's model there.
Okay, great. So let's talk about the brain. What's going on when people are motivated?
Sure. So it's worth us having a think about different systems of thinking about the brain and what's actually going on in there. And the most common but a very simplified version is something called the triune brain system, which basically splits the brain into three areas. So there's the reptilian part of the brain, which is the oldest part of the brain that existed earliest in our evolution, and takes care of the basic stuff. So it helps you subconsciously continue breathing, keeps your heart beating, keeps your head orientated as well, using the little bones in your ears, and it takes precedence over every other bit of the brain. So it's the bit that has the most direct priority over everything you do. And then there's the neocortex, which is the most human part of the brain, so the most developed and the most recently developed. And it's the clever bit of the brain, and it handles all your high order functions, as they call them. So your language, your imagination, your creative reasoning, that sort of stuff. And then between those two is something called the limbic part of the brain, or the paleomammalian part of the brain. And that's the emotional bit, that's the reactive bit. And it handles subconscious evaluation and response. And it pushes all that information and commits the events and your brain's responses into your memory banks. So there are two parts of that system. This is the most important system that we're going to talk about. So there are two parts. There's a part called the amygdala, which you've probably heard of, which basically is like, it's almost like a switch. So it's like an emotionally sensitive switching station, essentially. And what it does, it routes inbound data to other parts of the brain, unless you're under high stress, in which case a lot of stuff gets passed straight to the reptilian part of the brain. And then there's another part called the striatum, which basically has a whole bunch of stuff around reward and outcome and so on. But a key part of it is called the nucleus accumbens, which is basically the key part of the brain that deals with reward prediction. And that's very, very important. So, yeah.
Okay, and so how can we actually use what we know about neuroscience, and how can we trigger dopamine spikes?
Yeah, I'm sure. Well, yeah, it's worth describing what dopamine actually does in the brain as well, and why it's important. So basically, it's one of a number of neurotransmitters. So basically, the chemicals that pass stuff between the different parts of the brain, essentially. But dopamine in particular, it actually performs tasks before we obtain rewards, and that's really important. So it's basically there to encourage some kind of action. So it's either there to encourage action to achieve something that you want to get, or to avoid something that you don't want to get, or some danger or something or other. And it can take a number of different pathways through the brain. And one of those pathways is something called the mesolimbic pathway. And basically that takes dopamine, this neurotransmitter, from the limbic part of the brain to other parts of the brain, like the neocortex that we spoke about. It's the sort of the most modern human part of the brain. And it's the most important pathway to understand when thinking about rewards. And essentially, it triggers feedback, which basically enables you to predict rewards. So knowing that basically allows you to trick the brain into predicting rewards in a different way. And obviously that's a key part of that guy Victor Vroom's theory that we spoke about earlier on. It's about reward expectancy. And because dopamine acts before we get the rewards and triggers feedback for predicting rewards, you can trick the brain by causing these dopamine spikes in the right parts of the brain. So you can affect the level of motivation, the desire to do certain things, to get certain rewards. And in 2012, actually, there was a study that happened at the Vanderbilt University, where basically they did PET scans, so sort of like a CAT scan of the brains of two groups of people, which they they split into slackers, so people who were not motivated, and people who they were classing as go-getters, so highly motivated, high achiever people. And basically they looked at what was actually going on in these dopamine pathways. And they saw that in slackers, they saw massive dopamine spikes in the anterior insula, which is basically the part of the brain that deals with emotion and risk qualification. And then the go-getters, they saw the highest spikes in the nucleus accumbens that we spoke about and the prefrontal cortex. So basically what that tells us is that it's not just spiking dopamine that's important, but it's important to understand where it spikes. And so in order to use that information, basically we can train the brain to push more spikes in the expectation reward pathway, that mesolimbic pathway. We can do that through setting small goals, incremental goals. We shorten the feedback loop for rewards specifically, and we can send information about that result, those results, to other places. So there is an immediate feedback to getting these rewards. And then also you can build a focus on how it feels when you reach a reward rather than on the reward itself. That's a good way of training the brain.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting. So as you were speaking then, I was just writing my little notes and you were answering them as I was writing them. So essentially, so people's brains do behave differently. And essentially, as you're talking between like the slackers and the high achievers, their brains do actually react to different stimulus in different ways. Mm-hmm. And you were talking about being able to try and change the way their stimulus is working their brain by being their manager. Is that what you're like hinting at there?
Yeah, indeed. That's where we're headed.
Okay.
There are ways of training the brain to spike dopamine in certain places rather than others, and it's important to understand where it spikes them and what you can actually do for yourself and for your team members to spike it in the right place. Yeah.
Okay, great. So what are some of the examples of how to motivate engineering teams in particular then?
Yeah, so there are some standard things. So you can improve recognition of skills and seniority, for example. You can provide promotion opportunities. You can provide personal development opportunities. You can have a fair and a pleasant workplace. You can have a good work-life balance. You can improve recognition of the work they produce and the ideas and the input that they add to the team. You can set them more challenging goals, goals that have such a big, immediately obvious reward at the end of them, that they're motivated to achieve them. And then you can set better expectations of them, set more understandable, more clear expectations. And above all that, you can be a supportive, fair, and competent manager. And those are the best ways. Then there are some more things, so things specific to engineers, but also things that are specific to compensation. Which is it's not just a hygiene factor. There are neuroscientific reasons for getting compensation right as well. It's part of that reward pathway. So the obvious things like making sure there is a regular review of compensation, that it's market competitive, that they get good benefits, they get good learning budget, and they're able to actually use it. And then things that are specific to engineering as well. So consistent specification and good requirement setting, infrastructure that doesn't get in the way but actually supports the development process, and then simplified build and release processes, not too many meetings, good tooling, smart engineering team colleagues, etc. Whole number of things that you can do to improve the chances that an engineer will be motivated to achieve what the business achieves for them.
So when you're talking about the reward expectancy here, so obviously you're essentially your team using a better term, like lab rats, essentially. You're trying to put, positive reinforcement in place. I've read the book, was it Use the Carrot, Not the Stick, to always try and provide valuable rewards or whatever that would be for those individuals. What would be the impact on an individual where the reward was not received from the actual commitment they've got? So it's like, okay, if I do this, I automatically get a dopamine spike because there's an expectation that I'll be rewarded at the end of this. And then if that gets unnoticed or unappreciated, does that then have a detrimental effect on the employee?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you start to train the limbic system to essentially train the amygdala specifically, and train it to expect that hard work and effort will result in no reward.
And do you see motivational issues when people move from an environment that's very reward centric and actually, they do try and put in place these practices to reward the right types of behavior, then they move into a business without those type of practices in place? I would expect there'll be a decrease in motivation in the work they do because they don't have the same reward scheme in place. Have you seen similar things to that?
Yeah, very much so. Certainly in the case where people are moving from a startup environment to a more corporate or a more established environment, for example, which can be a bit more bureaucratic. It can be a bit more set in its ways. And typically what you see is that in the startup world, they've had a very short reward feedback loop, if that makes sense. So you learn what kind of rewards or what kind of expectations you can have very, very quickly, whereas in a bureaucratic environment or in a corporate environment, the reward feedback loop is much longer. And so you do get frustrated more easily.
Which is why people that work in startups and move into larger corporations normally come back to working in startups because of that faster turnaround period.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So questions from the audience then. So referencing the slacker or high-performing piece, how do you class someone as a slacker or high-performing brain profile or just a profile? Someone might have been high achieving but might currently be demotivated. The assumption is that people generally don't hire slackers.
That's an interesting one. So obviously I can't say very much about the criteria that particular study used when they were classing people as slackers or high performing or go-getters. But I suppose you can usually tell pretty qualitatively whether somebody is demotivated. It doesn't necessarily help to label them as a slacker in the moment, I don't think. But you can definitely spot signs of people being demotivated. And, going back to our talk the other week on burnout, it's typically one of the first stages towards that disengagement and burnout altogether. But,
Okay, so as one thing that you mentioned here, essentially, you sometimes don't hire slackers, obviously people that are demotivated. How do you identify during the recruitment process whether you feel you can offer rewards correctly to them during this phase?
Well, I suppose during the hiring process, it's pretty difficult because not all people are going to be apparently demotivated at that point. Hopefully you would hope they're in a position where they're trying to sell themselves to some degree. But what's also important is that you don't expect people to be 100% motivated at all times. It is part of the leader's role to motivate people who become demotivated. So if you can see talent, if you can see skills and a good culture add by bringing somebody in, but they have a tendency to become demotivated, I think I'd probably still want to have them in the team and work out ways of fixing those, those hygiene factors or the things that are demotivating them, and find ways of improving their input.
I would say anyone looking for a new job would be demotivated in some way, which is why they're looking for a new job. They didn't get the promotion they wanted, or their career's not progressing, or the environment they're working in is not working great. So I think there's always going to be an aspect of demotivation already inside them, which obviously they don't want to put across during an interview process. Right, do you actually try to identify what they care about to be able to identify what type of rewards you'd actually be putting in place if you took on this client?
Yeah.
And how would you ask those questions?
So there are some specific models you can use for that. So there's the moving motivators model, which is basically a tool which consists of a number of typical motivators that you can print out and put in front of them. They shuffle them around, they organize them, and then you talk through them. So you understand if someone is motivated more by learning, or more by authority, or more by cash, and so you can build an understanding of what you're going to need to have in place to keep that person motivated and keep them around long enough.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, and going on from the chat, so there's a few conversations about this. So one person's mentioned, I find on a personal level, I'm significantly less motivated when given a goal, reward, or job title. Do rewards cause more harm in a creative environment?
Ooh, in a creative environment, I'm going to assume includes in an engineering team, for example. But yeah, there have been studies that have shown that that purely having a very high reward to outcome ratio in a company is not enough on its own. Rewards also can be more about helping you in the current role that you're in. So maybe they're not cash rewards, maybe they're not status rewards, but they can be just the general rewarding feeling of having gotten something over the line. When we're talking about rewards, but certainly cash rewards and so on and so forth. There have been studies that have shown that they actually demotivate people in some cases, or at very best don't motivate them.
Sure. Yeah, I'd definitely say once you're in a more mid-level to senior position, cash is less of a motivator. Obviously, the newcomers are all about trying to get the cash in, so therefore there'll be a much higher motivation from those standpoints.
Yeah.
So another question from the audience: how do you manage short-term spikes that you may get from carbs or bonus, where you want to maintain that long-term reward neutral pathway development?
Neural pathway.
Neural pathway, okay.
Yeah, well, maybe carbs are your bonus. Maybe you reward people with pizza. There you go. No, yeah. So I suppose it's the same as with coffee or sugar or anything like that. These give you short-term spikes that help you get over a certain hump, but they train the brain in such a way that you're not going to be motivated by long-term goals. So yeah, they help and they're important. It helps to have a little bit of extra pep to get over a specific period of time. Anywhere between 8:30 and 11:30 for me. But yeah, they're not particularly helpful in building long-term resilience and long-term motivation for an outcome or a project.
Sure. I can imagine coffee falls under this bracket as well.
Yeah.
What about leaders becoming demotivated? How do we deal with dips in our motivation as a leader?
In the same way. So the ways of dealing with demotivation in a team are basically focused on shortening the feedback loop, getting wins more quickly, training the brain to expect that rewards will come at a higher rate by putting in more performance. Essentially that room theory is all about managing the ratio of input and effort to the speed at which rewards come at you. And you can train your brain to do that as an individual, setting yourself more incremental wins rather than big long-term projects where you might not see an outcome or a reward for months and months is less likely to train your brain in the right way than having a project which you can split and get immediate feedback within a week.
Certainly. Okay, so I'm getting completely out-geeked here from some of the questions. How does this marry with Daniel Pink whole motivation theory, which resolves our autonomy, mastery, and purpose? He says that actually bonus culture is negative and can distract people. Yeah. So in line with that, how do you define reward? Is it growth?
Growth can be a reward, and I'm assuming that means growth in a career sense and a learning and development sense. I suppose if you're a co-founder of a business, it can also be the growth of the company in general in terms of its revenue and success. But yeah, being able to move up the career ladder is a motivator for some people. Especially engineers. They're some of the best engineers I've worked with are only motivated by pushing themselves forward. There's another conversation in that, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. But yeah, totally. And all of this relates back to the same high level subjects that the motivation theory from Drive have. So those 3 points: autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Mastery, you get an immediate reward of being better at your job or having added more value to the company you're in by adding to your skills to achieve certain outcomes. So it's self-reinforcing in a way. And the same goes for autonomy and purpose. As you build more trust within the company by having more frequently positive outcomes and being rewarded for it, you are rewarded further with more autonomy and more decision-making capabilities within the company. It does all relate to the same stuff, really.
So when you talk about career growth as one of the reward mechanisms, if you're inside a business with only, let's say, 3 stages, junior, mid, senior, then obviously growth isn't going to be clearly achievable in the same type of way. Is it better for businesses to have levels in between each stage of their development so there is a more clarity of growth within inside, or is that not the right way to approach it?
The annoying answer is that it depends, I think. I think if you're in a company where you have 3 levels of growth within the engineering team, you're probably you're maybe at 15 people within the engineering team or so. When you're at 2 people in an engineering team, it really makes no difference. You can reward someone career-wise, but you can do that by giving them more responsibility to make decisions about the architecture, for example, or about the tools that you're using to build your product. And in later stages, the reward might be ownership of a team, being made a tech lead or an engineering manager. It depends on what the person wants. Some people want to remain an individual contributor forever, but have a principal engineering status. So it depends.
Okay, great. So you mentioned motivation is related to burnout. Could you go discuss that a little bit further?
Yeah, sure. Well, as we said the other time, one of the immediate signals that someone is on the path to burning out is disengagement and kind of starting to switch off. So if nothing else, that complete lack of motivation is a good warning sign that you can use in your team. And in the same sense that you can motivate someone by understanding their motivators and understanding what's going on in the brain when they're motivated or demotivated. You can also help someone who's on that trajectory to burnout by exploring those things with them and finding out as a collaboration why they're disengaging. And I suppose the same is true for yourself. If you excuse me, if you feel that you're disengaging and you're burning out, then you can start to take a serious look at whether you are on the trajectory towards burnout. Which as we discussed that time, that can be existential for the company. It can be detrimental to you for your physical health, and it's worth being on top of way before it starts to happen. So it's very, very, very related.
Okay, great. And falling back to personalized rewards a little bit. So there are sites out there that search people's social media to try and identify what they like. They, follow their Instagram and they see what they post about to actually provide recommendations. Normally it's more of a sales tactic to go, okay, you can send them this bottle of whiskey and it shows that you care because they like this type of stuff. Right. Would something like that actually be suitable as an option for a reward scheme outside of the standard more responsibility, promotion, growth, or along those lines?
It's a bit creepy. So I suppose we're talking about profiling people so that we can so that we can motivate them through subterfuge into doing something. I think if you were trying to do it with somebody who was within your team that you're supposed to have a direct personal connection to anyway, and you did that rather than asking them what would motivate them, I think that would be pretty creepy. Sure. But I suppose it sounds more like a sales tactic than a motivation tactic, if that makes sense.
Sure. Obviously, being directly managing individuals, you'd expect to be able to identify what they do at their weekends, what they do in their free time from your one-on-one meetings and general conversations around the office. So if you were in a situation where someone had done a stellar job and, released on a hard to hit milestone date or whatever that was, and you decide to reward them with their favorite whiskey or whatever that may be, is there going to be more demotivation across other members of the team that were not rewarded because they weren't given the challenge to be able to achieve something greater?
Yeah, and that is quite a common challenge in teams. You find that some people, especially more extroverted people, for example, are better at expressing their motivators and are better at opening up about the things that are demotivating them as well. It's the old adage, the squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? If they're less inclined to open up in one-to-ones, or if they just simply haven't been given the opportunity to work on more complicated projects or projects with a bigger impact on the business, then yeah, they are going to start feeling disengaged and less supported than some of the people who are getting that stuff, for sure. And
what are you supposed to do about that then?
So I think there are ways as a leader that you can prize that information out of them. The approach to finding out more about people and about what motivates them and what kind of things they want to be doing is, it's very, very different for certain types of people than it is from others. So as a leader, you have to be comfortable tweaking your approach and using different styles and models to find out more about what your team actually wants and what they're motivated by and what's annoying them. So it's all about communication. And one of the key leadership styles is obviously coaching, and that is a great way of finding out more about someone simply by putting them in a position where it's easier to open up than it is to keep stuff to themselves. Yeah.
Okay. And as leaders, what are some of the ways to actually understanding what we're actually motivated by ourselves? If I think back, say, right, what do I care about right now? What would motivate me? I'm struggling to think of something just off the top of my head as, yes, this would definitely be it. I assume that probably CTO levels are already driven from the game of being the CTO, trying to improve the business, and that's what they find their rewards with. What are other ways people can use to actually find out what they're motivated by?
So you can run tools like the Moving Motivators tool for yourself. It's something that's very simple to do. You print out some cards and shuffle them around, and it sounds very basic because it is. But also you can think back. You can think back to ways you've rewarded yourself in the past and the reasons you've given yourself those rewards. You can look at things that people have rewarded you for and why they've rewarded you, and which rewards felt more authentic than others and felt like they were more worthwhile than others, and work out from there. Okay. And sometimes you need to do it with a coach. Sometimes you need a coach to dig into what motivates you and help you unblock some of the things that might be preventing you from looking at your motivators. But, yeah, different strokes.
Great. And from the audience, how would you assist with motivation in an organization with no titles and a very loose hierarchy? There's a lot of businesses around at the moment that are flat structure, management-less type of approaches. What would you do in these circumstances?
Yeah. In order to join a team like that, I think you probably wouldn't be motivated by status and position. I think that's fair to say. If you've been open with someone during the interviewing process that you're a flat structure or a leprosy, then they're going to know in advance whether or not it's somewhere they can get the reward of different titles and so on. and know whether or not it's the right place for them to go for that. So I think other than status and job titles, you can reward them with learning opportunities and more interesting, more challenging projects. You can reward them with away days. You can reward them with conference tickets. You can reward them with all sorts of things that aren't related purely to cash and a job title. There's plenty out there.
Okay, great. And another question from the audience: any insights or recommended reading? I'm looking for scientific evidence to support team versus individual awards.
Ooh, that's a good one. There is a great book called Punished by Rewards, that is worth picking up. I'm afraid I can't remember the author off the top of my head at the moment, but that has a lot of scientific understanding. I think some of the classic books on influence and changing direction as well are worth picking up, because although they're not focused entirely on motivation, they do talk about how you motivate people to do specific things. So Influence by Robert Cialdini is worth picking up, and Switch by Chip and Dan Heath. That's another good book that has that's got some good scientific studies and that kind of thing, and also more anecdotal stuff, as every business book under the sun does. Yeah, I'd start with those, and then scientific papers. There's plenty around that talks about the psychology of rewards and the psychology of motivation and so on out there, and plenty of scientific studies and deep dives.
So that question actually raises that we haven't really discussed much about the differences of team level motivation versus obviously individuals. How would it be different if you're considering team motivation practices instead of individual level?
It's actually pretty hard to motivate a team as a single entity. My approach is always to look at the individuals and look at what motivates them. In which case, the process is exactly the same as if you're looking at yourself. You are essentially looking at a group of people and looking at them individually. Are you motivated by trickier coding challenges? Are you motivated by status bumps? Are you motivated by cash? Are you motivated by better familiarity with the rest of the team, or friendship with the rest of the team? Is kind of more collaborative working better for you? Should we try pair programming, etc.? But I don't think I would try and bring a group of people into a lump and say, right, this team needs to be motivated as one big entity in a certain way. That's quite difficult.
So in the cases of a small startup where they can't be giving financial rewards or position rewards, or even give them more freedom to do more training because everything's very tight and limited, can you actually change the way the team actually sees rewards and motivations? Can you actually get them used to a different set of rewards that you are able to deliver against, instead of what traditionally people jump to in their mindsets?
Yeah, absolutely. And, this is one of those situations where you can actually hire the right people in, knowing that they are going to be motivated by something specifically. And that thing is immediate business impact. In an early stage startup where you're either looking for product market fit, or you're just past the point of launch and you're iterating, you're scaling, what motivates people to be in that situation? And it's quite a tough situation. At the beginning of a company, there's a lot of ambiguity. There's a lot of hard deadlines. There's a lot of balancing between quality and scalability and getting stuff out that you need to be able to make. The people who thrive in those environments are people who are motivated by immediate business impact and being able to get stuff out there very quickly and get the feedback from the users and the world at large. So finding people who have that motivation is quite key.
Okay, great. And what's the impact on the business if you get your motivation scheme schedule incorrect, wrong, where essentially you're not motivating with the right type of rewards or even the right type of actions potentially?
Hi, Chair. That's quite common. People become so disengaged that unless they burn out, which is another option, they just move on. They move somewhere that's going to excite them and motivate them and give them the support they need. And obviously that's expensive because hiring is expensive. It can also result in lower quality products. Fundamentally, if someone's not motivated by the mission of the business or the work they're working on, the quality can start to slip. They start to care less about the work that they're putting out there and the products they're putting out. And so, yeah, they do start to cut corners. But yeah, it can be expensive.
So with the more old school type CEOs, some of the comments you might have, heard in the past is, their motivation is their pay. They're paid to be here. They're paid to work. So if you don't put any type of motivation scheme in place, is it considered to be a higher risk strategy for the business by not rewarding certain types of actions or, expectations amongst the team?
Yeah. So first of all, there is no motivation scheme. Motivating people is part of your responsibility as a leader, and so that it should not be an initiative or a project or whatever. It's just part of the day-to-day leadership responsibility. But I think if you have leaders who are inexperienced or have leaders who aren't interested in the motivation of their team, or like I said, if they're kind of old school pathological leaders who basically assume that that the financial reward is the motivator there, then yeah, you do end up with teams who don't produce, they don't perform, and they disappear and join some other company where their motivations are better met. But it is a day-to-day responsibility of you as a leader to understand why people are motivated and how to motivate them.
Is motivation action and business expectation that should be documented, that it is actually there, or is there just an expectation that the leaders of the business understand this is part of their responsibility?
Eventually in your lifetime as a leader, you will understand that without motivating team members, it is impossible to run a business. You're essentially jumping from team to team and so on and so forth. We've got a little advert going on there. Thank you. Where was I? Yeah, sorry. I think that's
so essentially, is this something that's documented inside of a business, or is there like an expectation that leaders will, as part of their job, it's their responsibility to not enforce motivation, but to support and motivate their teams?
Yes, yeah, I think so. I think generally speaking, when you're hiring someone in, especially to a pre-existing team, to an established team, you have to look for people who are capable of motivating people and finding out why they're demotivated if they are. That is a core part of leading people at the end of the day. Yeah,
absolutely. Okay, then. So I'm sort of running out of questions now, guys. So essentially, feel free to ask your questions if you've got any more in. Andy, do you want to just give a roundup of, the key things to be considering, the key places to look for any other information that we haven't brought up already, and anything else we should take away moving forward?
Well, no, so I think understanding what actually goes on in the brain does help, it's not purely about having tactics that you can line up and throw at people. It is about understanding individuals and their motivations, but knowing that the movement of dopamine around the brain in specific ways can be trained and can be controlled, and not just extrinsically by external factors like better eating, better sleeping, and so on and so forth, but also by training yourself. By setting yourself smaller targets and decreasing the reward feedback loop, essentially. I think that it is relevant and it is actionable. And then, it's a good set of skills to have as well.
Absolutely. Okay, well, it's been fantastic to have you here, Andy. It's definitely seemed very Very interesting topic, talking about neuroscience, because I've got no experience with that whatsoever. But you tied it very nicely into motivation. So thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.
Yeah, you can connect with Andy after this event on LinkedIn or Twitter from the links I'm sharing in now. And obviously those inside CTO Craft, you can access there. There is a call to action underneath the video as well, I believe. That should link you to the community for those that wish to sign up. Our next CTO Craft Bytes session will be a fireside chat next Friday, 3rd of July at lunchtime again, 12:30 UK time, on agile delivery and productivity secrets. So I'll just share the link in the chat with you guys now if you want to get in early and get yourself signed up for that. So thank you all for joining today. I hope you've enjoyed the session, and thanks again to Andy. So thank you very much, guys. Have a good week. Thanks a lot, guys.
Bye. So.